Hello, BookTube. I'm here today to review a book that needs no introduction whatsoever, but I'm going to give it one anyway. The Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien. Now, this is a book that many things have been said about, and I know that I have in my About section of my channel, I say I try to review more obscure books, which I personally tend to like more obscure fantasy and science fiction books. Like, I like Tales of the Dying Earth, and I was getting into Book of the New Sun a bit and stuff like that. And of course, my Thomas Covenant video is still my highest viewed video on the channel. So I think, in general, I want to keep my channel in that direction. But every once in a while, I do want to do something different. And, well, this isn't different from the norm, but I feel like I really wanted to reread this because I hadn't read since elementary school. And this channel was probably more above anything else, just me reviewing anything that I happen to read that I think you'll be interested in hearing my thoughts on. So there's not too much I can say about this that no one else has said already. Probably nothing, really. But I'll try to give my opinion and be as original as I can. And I think my opinion differs a bit from the consensus, but I'll let you guys decide about that. First of all, I want to talk about the prose writing. I think that Tolkien, that's one of the things I like to talk about most in the book, and I think that I generally enjoy, or generally value, one of the highest things I value in the book is prose writing. I think Tolkien's a beautiful prose writer. He's just a very good writer. And that's actually something that I think has made the book age well. Like a lot of people feel like this book has aged badly because it's written in a very strange language compared to what a lot of more recent fantasy books are written in. Although I can't say a complete certainty because I haven't read that many modern fantasy books. However, I feel like that actually makes it age better because it just feels better. Like one of the things about modern fantasy, I know if any of you guys know the YouTuber Daniel Green, he'll always say he prefers modern fantasy over classic fantasy because he feels like the characters are better written. That might be true, but I feel like in prose, it's usually not as good as classic fantasy. Or at least my favorite prose authors are authors of classic fantasy, like Jack Vance and Robert E. Howard. And so I feel like the prose in this has it not aged badly, it's actually, I think, aged very well in comparison to what is generally modern fantasy today. Tolkien's a beautiful writer. But his world, although it's vast, it's arguably the most complex fantasy world ever made. I don't think that's necessarily a point of quality, it's just an interesting thing about it. I think it's dull. Like, his world is not actually very interesting. I touched on some stuff in Silmarillion about this, and I'll touch on them again. The problem is, it's like, he's trying to emulate Norse mythology, and he's trying to do it in a way that has a Christian moral framework. This has mixed results. I think that's like the main point of Lord of the Rings, is trying to bring Norse mythology into a modern book, but to put it with a Christian moral framework so people today can understand and empathize with the characters. However, this results in, how do I put this? In a weird sort of way, it's kind of one of the most finely tuned books I've ever read, in the sense like everything that happens in the plot has a very clear logical reason. Like even with the whole soft magic, as people call it, I feel like he gives very good reasons for everything that happens, but they're not reasons you can empathize with. Like, for example, he has ideas about people being predestined to be good or evil. And the idea of people, like, which usually is tied to your social status. Like, lords are noble based off their ancestry, and certain races have certain defining characteristics. These themes are really disheartening, and it makes the world not only disheartening, but, dull. Like, here's a world in which change is kind of actively discouraged. I know I mentioned also in the Silmarillion video Michael Moorcock's opinions on this. He's another British fantasy writer, and he's known for, he didn't dislike Tolkien personally, but he thinks Tolkien is a, I quote, crypto-fascist. I think that's a bit much. I wouldn't say that, but I do think that Tolkien's worldview that he puts in this book is very disheartening, because he basically sets everything out in such a logical way, like in terms of what's supposed to be with regards to morality and the way people can behave. It's done in a way so it feels like stale as reading it, because you don't feel like anything can happen against what they're going to do. There's never really a sense that the good characters will be anything but good, or the bad characters will be anything but bad. The closest you ever get to redemption is Gollum, but even him doesn't redeem himself. And regarding the characters, none of them are very interesting and memorable. They're all actually, except for one. I'll get into that later. So I think the problem is they're just based off archetypes, but they're not I don't expect them to deconstruct archetypes, but they're not fully realized archetypes. They're just and they don't have very good, strong dialogue. They just go onto a scene and they need to fulfill a certain purpose in the story, and they're just supposed to be respected and supposed to be admired and they're supposed to be good, and not really given us justification for that. Because like I said before, in Tolkien's world, your morality is basically predetermined by your social status and your ancestry and all that. And this results in some very dull characters. I don't think, you're talking about the main character, Frodo, he's not at all interesting. He's a guy, I think the main thing people like about him, when they do like him, is they feel like he's an average guy from the Shire which is like rural England, who becomes a hero. And that's the same thing of Sam. I don't see that for either of them. There's no justification why he becomes a hero, apart from the fact that he's this Tookish blood or whatever. And it's not, you don't see him develop at all very much. And I guess you kind of see him develop, but it's a very sudden way. It's not like, it doesn't feel organic. It just feels kind of forced. And in any event, you don't really learn very much about Frodo or Sam. I don't know why Sam is so loyal to Frodo, although there is, of course, that theory that he's gay, but I don't think that's really why. I think it's because Tolkien just made him that way and he wanted him to serve the story. That's the same thing for all of his characters. They're just tools in the hands of the story. Like I said, the story follows, it's like the story has some sort of unwritten rules of how people are supposed to behave, like whether they're good or bad, or if certain actions are wise or they're folly or whatever. And they don't tell you what those rules are, but you kind of figure them out over time. And they realize that the entire universe is bound by them, and it makes it very dull and unsympathetic. But there's the one character I do like, Gollum. I'm not sure if he's like, I'm not sure if he's one of the better characters I've ever read, but he definitely stands out, especially in comparison to all these dull characters. Gollum is, I think, everything a character, like an ideal, a really, really, really good side character can be. He is, just name a few things. He's visually distinctive. He has a distinct way of speaking. He has an interesting backstory. He has a motive that is, it seems evil, and it is, but it's not associated with Sauron. It's like a tertiary third evil. And he kind of subtly seems to maybe undergo a redemption arc, or at least he seems pitiable, but he fails at it. And that's interesting. I think that he's a really good character. But he stands out largely, I think, because the other character is just so poorly written. And maybe he isn't even that good of a character if I were to stand him up beside some of the characters I like in other books. And now I'd like to cap off this view with a few things. Well, one is also, I never actually used to hear people talk about Tolkien being racist, and I kind of dismissed it. I wasn't really sure. Like, I didn't remember that much when I first read it. Now that I read it, it's pretty... I mean, everyone has different opinions on it, and there's actually this really good article on the Middle-earth Wiki in which they discuss the arguments for and against Tolkien being racist. I think it's pretty balanced. After reading this, though, I think it's... To me, at least, I think it's kind of obvious he was definitely racist. And he put it into this war. Like, the thing about the Easterlings, and there's some other uncomfortable stuff, too. I didn't realize it at all the first time I read it, because I was in elementary school. But when I look back at it, it seems like there's some stuff that's, like, very suggestive of racism. Like, so, for example, the orcs, for example, I've heard people describe as being black-skinned. I didn't think, well, they're supposed to be green, right? Well, I think most of them are green, but the Uruk-hai are black. And the thing is, not only the Uruk-hai black-skinned, it's hinted that they're possibly a crossbreeding between humans and orcs. And that made me wonder, is Tolkien talking about that racist thing, where, like, a lot of racists, I'm not sure if I can use the word here, but a lot of racists had this word for when white and black people intermingled, and they hated that. That seems to... I wondered if Tolkien, like, commenting on that? That'd be really disturbing. Another thing is the Easterlings are a pretty obvious thing. They're darker-skinned people from the East, and they're more loyal to Sauron. That's another thing. Although, however, there are arguments against him being racist. As I mentioned in that article, they point out he does seem to value cooperation between the races, and then when the races fight each other, like the elves, dwarves, humans, it's a bad thing. However, he seems to be of the opinion that they're all on a fixed course, basically, in terms of whether they're good or evil. That's all based on whether or not they obeyed the commands of God, the God of this world, Eru or Elevatar. And basically, it's like they can kind of be organized in tiers based off of that. And so inherently, some seem better than others. And I mean, it's not much, it's more in the Silmarillion. That's going off topic a bit. Now, the last thing I want to say is I want to comment a bit on Tolkien's influence on fantasy. He's often called the father of fantasy, or the guy who started the modern fantasy genre, or not the modern fantasy genre, helped popularize it. So my opinion on this is I think that Tolkien's influence, although he's definitely an influential guy, like vastly, but it's been exaggerated. The thing is, his main influence is on the currently most commercially successful form of fantasy. That is epic fantasy, which is like the Wheel of Time, the Stormlight Archive, all that other stuff, Game of Thrones, or Song of Fire rather, all that other stuff. And so in that regard, he definitely helped massively popularize fantasy. Like might not become nearly as popular without him. And also a lot of the most popular fantasy works today definitely owe their roots to Tolkien. That being said, he did not invent the fantasy genre, and there were other people before him and and he wrote alongside, like around the same time as him, and who came after him, who honestly I don't think owe anything or very little to Tolkien. I would say people like Robert E. Howard, Jack Vance, Fitz Leiber, Michael Moorcock. Those people, sometimes they even tried to make themselves in direct contrast to Tolkien, like Moorcock, although one could argue that is being influenced by Tolkien anyway. But the thing is, without Lord of the Rings, fantasy would still exist. It just wouldn't be as popular or taking a different direction. So I think that in that sense, Tolkien's impact is exaggerated. And I don't like the idea people seem to have is that they feel like people owe Tolkien stuff. I think it's nice Tolkien made the fantasy genre more popular, but in some ways, people could argue he's actually stifled it because he's made a lot of imitators, and people get stuck into this kind of formulaic thing where they make these really long doorstopper books. I generally actually like those books, so I'm not criticizing it, but I understand why people would criticize it. And where there's this big world and there's the map and there's all these characters, and maybe we should stop doing that because it's kind of really overdone and the stories end up kind of dull. I actually like a lot of the stories, like I said, but I understand why people would be more critical of Tolkien. And after reading Lord of the Rings, I love The Hobbit, but I have mixed feelings about The Lord of the Rings and The Silmarillion, so I honestly cannot count him as one of my favorite authors. And as I've said, I don't think the fantasy genre, fantasy authors should think of themselves as like owing anything to him, because he made the fantasy genre popular, and he was a huge influence on the most successful fantasy stories today, but there's a lot of fantasy out there that it honestly does not really have much to do with Tolkien and shouldn't be regarded as such. But anyway, I can still recommend Lord of the Rings, though. I have mixed feelings about it, but if you can get over the arguably not overt racism in it, and the disheartening themes and messages about humanity that are inconsistent, it's like I said, a lot of the problems in this book come with trying to apply Christian morality to Norse mythology. So, for example, he seems to at some points talk about how war is tragic, like how people die and you shouldn't value war, and if a civilization values war too much, it's in decline. But on the other hand, his descriptions of battles are like super romanticized. We talk about the glory of the charge, these big cavalry charges, these heroic battles in which these heroes can kill many orcs effortlessly. It's like he can't decide whether or not he wants to glorify war or romanticize war. And that's just one thing that's inconsistent. If you go over these things, I think that this work is largely carried by the writing. If you don't like the writing, I honestly don't think there's much to recommend here because the characters aren't good. The themes are not sympathetic. The world is very large and maybe interesting to some, but not interesting to me. But just for the writing alone, and also if you want to, I guess to some extent, Bible is history, although if you want to really see the history of fantasy, I'd probably look at some other stuff. But in those regards, I can kind of recommend Lord of the Rings, but I'm not super enthusiastic about it. I might even consider myself a fan of it just because there are some things I generally like about it. But in general, I do not like this as much as I originally did when I first read it in elementary school. But I can credit it to this. This book was probably the thing that really got me into fantasy, albeit there was a long gap between me reading this and all the time. But this book, though, in elementary school, I was totally obsessed with. Like a lot of people read, they were really obsessed with Harry Potter, and they read and reread it constantly, and they're really obsessed with it. I don't reread books in general, but I liked Harry Potter, but I wasn't obsessed with it. I thought, this is pretty good. I was obsessed with Lord of the Rings. And so I think this book really got me into reading. So I have to be thankful for that regard. But anyway, after all these long digressions, I will give this book a 3 out of 5 stars. Anyway, thank you for listening. Make sure to please the YouTube algorithm gods by liking, commenting, and subscribing, and have a nice day.